Hi, welcome to Arkintel. If Italy fails, the eurozone could shatter. Italy isn't a sideshow. It's Europe's third largest economy, home to 58 million people, and it's carrying over 3 trillion euros in debt, equal to 137.9% of its GDP. The eurozone average is just 88%. France is at 114%. Only Greece is higher, but Greece is tiny compared to Italy. That's why it matters. Italy already spends nearly 90 billion euros a year on interest, more than it spends on schools or defense. With rates still high, that burden isn't shrinking. So the question isn't whether Italy has a debt problem. It does. The real question is, could Italy's crisis become Europe's breaking point? Italy wasn't always drowning in debt. In the post-war decades, it was a growth powerhouse. Between the 1950s and 1980s, it became one of the world's top industrial economies. But when Italy joined the euro in the late 1990s, it lost the ability to devalue its currency, a tool it had used for decades to stay competitive. Instead of making deep reforms, Rome leaned on borrowing. Governments changed frequently, bureaucracy remained bloated, and productivity stalled. By the time the eurozone's debt crisis hit in the 2010s, Italy was already fragile. It avoided collapse only because of its sheer size. But the core problem wasn't solved, only delayed. And that delay brings us to today, where the cracks in Italy's finances can no longer be ignored. Italy's debt ratio has climbed to 137.9% of its GDP in early 2025, up from 135.3% just a year earlier. The mountain of public debt is still rising, not falling. The deficit has improved, dropping from 7.2% in 2023 to 3.4% in 2024, with a target of 3.3% this year. That's progress. But Brussels is still watching closely. Growth remains the weak point. In 2024, the economy grew by just 0.7%, and by mid-2025, it had already slipped into a small contraction. Forecasts suggest that this year, they may struggle to reach even 0.5% growth. And then there are demographics. Italy has one of the oldest populations in the world, with births hitting a record low of 370,000 in 2024 and a fertility rate of just 1.18. Fewer workers and rising pension costs mean more pressure on the system. Add in stagnant productivity and young people leaving for better opportunities abroad, and the cycle is clear. Low growth leads to more borrowing drives up interest, and higher interest leaves even less room to grow. And this is where Italy's problem becomes everyone's problem. Italy's debt isn't contained within its borders. Its government bonds, BTPs, are held by banks, pension funds, and insurers across Europe. If confidence collapses and Italian yields spike, those institutions take losses that could ripple through the entire banking system. This is exactly what happened with Greece in 2010, except Greece was tiny compared to Italy. Italy is 10 times larger. There is no bailout fund big enough to cover that quietly. That's why markets obsess over every move in Italy's bond spreads. A spike there isn't just a national issue, it's a European alarm bell. But numbers aren't the only danger. Politics may be the real trigger. The economics are messy. The politics may be worse. In July 2024, the European Union formally put Italy under the excessive deficit procedure, giving Rome until 2026 to bring its deficit under the EU's 3% ceiling. On paper, the path looks achievable. But Brussels isn't just watching the numbers. It's demanding structural reforms. And that's where the real challenge begins. Cutting pensions, reforming labor laws, or slashing subsidies might satisfy Brussels, but in Italy, these moves can topple governments overnight. Since World War II, the country has cycled through more than 70 governments. Political instability isn't an anomaly here. It's the tradition. That constant tension, Brussels pushing for discipline, Italians resisting painful change, is what makes the debt mountain so dangerous. Even when the fiscal numbers improve, the political risk threatens to unravel everything. And yet, Europe does have weapons it can use to contain the fire if it starts. So what could prevent a disaster? First, the European Central Bank. The ECB has tools like the Transmission Protection Instrument, a program that can buy Italian bonds if markets panic. This has already calmed spreads. In early 2025, the Italy-Germany 10-year spread narrowed below 100 basis points. But this support is conditional. If Italy drifts on reforms, the backstop weakens. Second, fiscal discipline. Italy did return to a primary surplus in 2024, meaning it covered interest without borrowing more. If it can widen that surplus in the years ahead, the debt ratio could slowly bend downward. Third, EU oversight. The reformed fiscal rules that came into effect in 2024 allow more flexibility, tailored paths rather than one-size-fits-all targets. But that flexibility only comes if Rome delivers on reforms and investment milestones tied to EU recovery funds. These safety nets exist, but they are not guarantees. They are lifelines, and lifelines can snap. If they do, the fallout won't just hit Italy. It could test the very survival of the euro itself. The warning signs are hard to miss. Italy's interest costs are eating up about 4% of GDP, one of the highest burdens in Europe. Growth remains sluggish, and by mid-2025, the economy was already showing signs of contraction. Layered on top of that is Italy's ever-present political risk, where fragile coalitions and voter backlash can derail even the most carefully planned reforms. But there are also reasons for cautious optimism. Italy has managed to return to a primary surplus, proving that it can cover its interest payments without adding fresh borrowing. Massive EU recovery funds are still flowing into projects aimed at digitalization and infrastructure, which could eventually boost productivity if executed well. And with the new fiscal rules that came into effect in 2024, Brussels now rewards credible long-term reform plans instead of just focusing on blunt deficit targets. Italy is not doomed, but it is fragile. And fragility is dangerous because all it takes is one shock to set off the explosion. So here we are. Italy is balancing on a knife's edge. On one side, steady reforms, ECB support, and careful oversight could stabilize the country. On the other, rising debt, weak growth, and political paralysis could light the fuse on Europe's next crisis. If Italy's debt bomb explodes, the shockwaves won't stop in Rome. They'll hit Paris, Berlin, Frankfurt, and the very core of the euro. The stakes are enormous, and the clock is ticking. The real question is, will Italy act before the fuse burns out, or will the eurozone's third largest economy trigger a crisis no one can contain? If you found this video insightful, make sure to check out Germany's economic engine is breaking down. In this video, we reveal how Germany, Europe's economic engine, is facing an industrial unraveling driven by energy shocks, factory closures, reliance on China, and political gridlock, putting its entire growth model at risk. Click the video to watch now.